Hi, my name is Suhan Kacholia, and this summer I was a data science fellow at the Department of Health and Human Services through the Coding It Forward Fellowship, and I worked in the Office of the Chief AI Officer. As part of my work, I presented about the uses of ChatGPT's advanced data analysis mode and what it means for federal government. So most of you might be familiar with ChatGPT, which is a generative AI tool by OpenAI that produces text, code, and more. What you might not be as familiar with is the Advanced Data Analysis mode, which is an add-on to GPT released in July that allows users to run code, upload and download files, and analyze data all in the browser environment. It does require a ChatGPT Plus subscription, $20 a month. Why is this important? Well, it allows anyone to conduct data science, create graphs and charts, and efficiently manage files just using plain language. So you don't need to have any coding expertise or know any coding languages to have these skills, which unlocks a lot of data analytics skills for non-technical staff. There's a huge data skills gap in government with more demand for data and analytics and quantitative decision making than there are people who have the training or expertise to provide that. So this can help bridge that gap, saving money, increasing efficiency, and improving decision making at all levels of government. I wanted to show an example of what this looks like, but first wanted to talk about some risks and limitations of the service. The first is that output is so unreliable. GPT is not perfect and it can make mistakes. So checking code and output for errors is still crucial. And for any high stakes situations, I would still have a human in the loop. The second is privacy. So unless you're using the Microsoft Azure OpenAI for Government service, which is FedRAMPed and is more secure, I would avoid uploading any sensitive data directly to ChatGPT in the browser, as OpenAI has had data leaks before and GPT is not completely secure. And lastly, internet access. GPT does not have access to the internet, at least in this mode. In other modes, you can access the internet. But in this mode, you can't find any up-to-date information, data sets, or citations for your output. That being said, I wanted to go through an example of what using this actually looks like. So first, I'm going to download a data set. I'm going to use the NIH Reporter data set, which is just a report of all the grants that the NIH has in a particular year and all the projects that they're funding. So I will download it. I now have a zip file which has a CSV of the data. And then I can go to the ChatGPT service. I will go to GPT-4 and click Advanced Data Analysis. Then I will just click this plus button, find the file I'm looking for, wait till it loads, which might take a second. But in the meantime, I'll write out my first prompt. And it can be something as basic as describe this data set. Pretend you are a high-level official at the NIH and tell me some questions I can answer to using this data. So one thing you'll notice is that first it has to load the data, and when it does this, you can click the show work button for anything it does, and you will see that you have all of the exact code that it's writing. This is all in Python. So if you know any Python, you can copy paste this code and run it yourself, and it will result in the exact same output. So that is really good for transparency. In this case, it's not really like a black box. You can see exactly what it's doing. You can reproduce it yourself, and you have the exact code that it's using. So it examined the data set. It looked at all of these columns, all of these names, and it figured out what all of these columns mean, at least some of them. And Now, using that, it can even give us some high-level types of analyses we might want to do based on this data. So maybe we can say, let's do this first one. Let's do one, and we can tell it to also produce some graphs along with this. And we can say, go beyond some simple bar graphs. And as you can see, this is a pretty open-ended question. I'm not saying exactly how to do it. I'm just having it. We have this large goal, which is figuring out how funding is distributed across different institutes in the NIH. And now it's going to try to figure that out. So first it figured out which are the top 5 administrating institutes based on their total funding. So all of these initials probably mean something. You'd have to go to the data set coding and figure that out, but that's pretty easy to do. And now it's going to produce some actual graphs to display it. Oh, and as you can see, it made an error, which is actually, it's fine, because it also figured out why it made that error and tells us how to proceed. So we'll just keep proceeding. So I think this is actually good. It shows that it can be sometimes finicky, but it is pretty like good at self-correcting and figuring out what to do next. So here you can see like a pretty useful bar graph and pie chart of the distribution of funding in the billions by different institutes, which is useful to know for any policymaker. Then we can do some more questions. Let's do some time series analysis. So again, I gave it a pretty vague goal and it broke it down into different steps, and we'll go through each step and just you know, do the task. And here you can see that it's also doing some pretty complex statistical tests to make sure that the analysis it's doing is valid. So it's acting like a real statistician or data scientist would, by checking its assumptions and making sure to perform any reasonable or any tests of any assumptions that are necessary. The next thing you can do is, like, all of this can get kind of complicated. So the best thing about GPT is that it's not only good at this data analysis, but it's also a large language model. So it can also, talk about text in different ways. So here what we can do is ask it to explain what you just did, but for a non-technical lay person. And now it's breaking it down into a way that's very understandable to even somebody who's never done any sort of statistics or data science. And lastly, I want to ask, how would you synthesize your findings for a policymaker, and what conclusions can you draw from it? And lastly, you can also export all of this into a PDF or another CSV if you do any data modifications. So here we can say, put the graphs and the analysis to a well-formatted, pretty PDF. And again, this is something that could usually take a data analyst or data scientist a lot of time. And some of it isn't perfect. Like you could probably improve the visuals of this pie chart, for example, because it can't actually see what it's making. But overall, it has, oh, it didn't work. But overall, I think it just speeds up the data science process a lot, and it makes it very easy for anyone who's non-technical to come up with like quantitative insights about whatever it is that they're doing. And this time it worked. Cool. I wanted to talk about some tips for using it. So first of all, the more information that you provide in the prompt, the better the output will be. So I mostly had some pretty like vague and large scale prompts. If I had more detail, like when I said to check your assumptions in the time series graph, that made it better. And as you can see, I had a pretty back and forth conversation with GPT. It did make errors, and that's to be expected, but I think it's still like very workable. You can just tell it what it did wrong, or you can tell it what other things you want it to do, and so on. And I think like that kind of iterative process is the best way of doing this. Learning what kind of statistical techniques and visualizations exist, even if you don't know how to actually make them or use them, is helpful just to guide GPT. For example, knowing that like time series data is something that you can analyze, and how that's used, even if you don't know actually how to like compute it yourself, could be helpful. Knowing that like machine learning is like something that exists, that is something that you can actually do within this data analysis mode. And I would encourage you to keep playing with it and see what works, what doesn't. Be creative, try different things. And I just uploaded one CSV file, but you can upload multiple files. You can upload zip files, you can upload images and more. So really you can try this with like a lot of different file formats. More use case suggestions, data cleaning. I've used this often to clean up unstructured, messy data. Conversion, you can convert like Excel sheets to CSVs, GIF files to MP4s very easily, very quickly. And there are more creative uses too. I've seen people make QR codes immediately, make interactive games within this, and so on. And here's just like another set of visualizations that another person, Ethan Malik, a professor at Wharton, made using this mode. And he doesn't know Python at all. So all of this is just using this like natural language kind of mode. But yeah, with that being said, I appreciate it. And I hope that you can find this useful and find more creative and innovative uses of this mode in your own work, especially for government, where having more data analysis is always necessary. But yeah, thank you so much.